新闻硬邦邦听新闻最爽，我是节目主持人斯坦，欢迎各位收看。我现在在欧洲议会这边要召开对中政策跨国议会联盟，那今天会有非常多的来自世界各国，不只是欧盟啊，包括南美洲，包括日本，包括台湾的国会议员来讨论最近中共政府对人权的迫害，还有现在全世界要怎么处理对中政策相关的议题。那今天的很多有趣的 panel 有包含关于国有器官的，关于供应链的安全，关于人权，跟关于台海的和平与稳定。那看看我们今天能采访到哪些国会议员，然后了解一下他们对台湾还有对中共最近对外扩张的野心有什么样的想法。开始吧。MPs from all around the world are taking part in Ipac and from all the different parties. Here I have MP Veselinovic from the Green Party of Serbia, and you just delivered a very impressive speech about the environmental issues and China's interference. Could you tell the viewers about how China is trying to interfere with the environmental policies in Serbia?
So what we have witnessed in Serbia, and also we heard from different other MPs from through all over the world, is what is especially concerning our party and also parts of the constituencies and the peoples in Serbia. That is the environmental issues of extensively mining projects which are conducted by the different Chinese companies. By that we are predominantly thinking about eastern Serbia and about the copper mining in that area, which is affecting thousands of people with displacements and the widening of the mining area, but also impacting different environmental issues such as polluting the rivers and polluting the air, not to mention different hardships in labor conditions of the people who are working in the mines.
And because there are many Chinese businesses that are heavily involved in Serbia. I know with your electricity section, there are many power plants that are also being sponsored by the Chinese companies. Is there any strategy or any political stance that the Serbian government is trying to do to counter that?
Totally on contrary to that.
Okay.
So the Serbian government is doing something which is called steel friendship with China, which is developing the project not just in the environmental sector, but also in the surveillance and digital sector with this Huawei facial recognition camera, but also in the different infrastructural projects such as railways and highways with the Chinese loans and Chinese companies which is delivering it.
This is very worrying. Well, thank you so much for answering the questions, and yeah, let's build the common policies together. So right now I have Reinhard Bütikofer from the German Green Party and a long member of Ipac. Herr Bütikofer, what do you think about today's session?
Well, this is the fourth Ipac summit, and I think the fact that this has been crowned with the presence of Taiwan's Vice President signals that Ipac has made a lot of headway since we founded it in 2020. Ipac is now an internationally recognized, effective organization to help coordinating democracies in their response to China's increasingly aggressive external and increasingly oppressive internal policies. And I believe the fact that there are now more than 40 parliaments represented within Ipac gives testimony to the idea that not only the ideas of democracy, rule of law, and human rights are powerful, but also the idea that people from very different political backgrounds, conservatives, very conservative people, socialists, liberals, Greens, what have you, can work together in the defense of these core values and of our shared interests. And I think that is the message from this summit meeting, and that's a very positive message.
And after today's session and after Vice President Xiao's speech, what do you think might be the following steps by the parliamentarians to fight back or to protect themselves from the coercion coming from countries like China?
Look, I would assume that the Chinese mission is running in circles, realizing that they have not been able to prevent this from happening. So they have been overestimating their influence campaign. This is a good thing to know. The parliament has very clearly signaled from the very beginning of the legislative period that they want to continue the course that had been set over previous years. I don't see a turnaround. I don't see anybody getting weak knees because of so-called charm offensive, which doesn't exist, from Beijing. The parliament will have to fight a multi-dimensional kind of effort, because this is about economic issues. Like Jose Gata explained in his presentation to the group here, without de-risking, without making yourself less dependent on unilateral Chinese supply chains, for instance, you can hardly stand up to their blackmail. So that's one element. The other element is supporting Taiwan, continuing to clearly state that Europe has a vested interest in the stability of the Taiwan Strait. We have a vested interest. This is not just a far-off kind of thing that we should turn our back to. No, this is having an impact globally. And so we're showing solidarity with Taiwan, but we're also defending our own back. And in addition to that, we have to push back against Chinese interference, against information manipulation. We also have to make sure that countries that may fall victim to Chinese blackmailing would be offered an alternative from the European side. Like, countries have been more dependent because they fell for Belt and Road. If Europe manages to make a counter-offer with Global Gateway, those countries at least have a choice. So that is also relevant. We don't want China to force countries from Africa, from Asia, from Latin America to support their claim that they are justified in potentially a military attack on Taiwan. So I think the European Parliament has to work on all these levels, but the European Parliament must also make sure, and I think this is very important, that national parliaments follow suit. Some national parliaments are very proactive, like the Dutch, some not so much, like the Germans. Some haven't really gone there yet. Not all European parliaments have passed resolutions denouncing China's misinterpretation of UNGA Resolution 2758. Some have, some haven't. So I think we have to create a phalanx of democratic parliaments. This is also one of the tasks of this European Parliament.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
And during the Ipac session here in Brussels, I've encountered Peter Matters from Jamestown Foundation. Peter, thank you so much for what your organization does, what you do for promoting human rights and fighting back against ideological subversion that is coming from not very friendly countries. I have a question. Because recently seeing with the rise of Chinese propaganda, with the rise of AI-driven narratives and the overall coercion coming from totalitarian states like China, what do you think the democratic countries should do, both from the governmental point of view and from the point of view of civil society?
Look, you're quite right that this is something that it's not just a governmental issue, and it's a democracy. We are citizens, we have agency, we have our own choices, right? As citizens, as consumers, as users. And the most important thing is that government sets the law, they set the regulations, and they provide the capabilities to enforce. And we need governments to set clear lines about, if we're talking about propaganda, what platforms are usable. And we know that the Chinese Communist Party has a long history and the intent and the proven sort of history of of trying to shape mass opinion, not just inside the party, not just of the party faithful, but of all Chinese citizens, and then everyone who deals with China in some form or another. So this is an area where, if you're thinking about a platform like TikTok, how do you insulate, or sort of, if you want to use that platform, how should countries insulate themselves or remove the CCP control from the usage of that platform? And that's really what the fight in the United States is about. But it's one that actually is a fight that all countries, all democracies should be having, right? But you could think about this across a range of platforms. And it also means that if we're going to set up a law, like, we have to have the investigative authority to go after it, to look into it. And if we're in a democracy, we want those authorities to focus on illegal behavior, right? But there's also a lot of behavior that isn't illegal, and we wouldn't want to make illegal in terms of our universities or companies or individuals interacting with foreigners or another country. But it also means we have to have a discussion. We have to be able to talk openly about what is the Chinese Communist Party, what are they doing, right? One of the presentations here was about organ harvesting and transplantation, right? So if you are a medical school, if you are a hospital, and you think about the physician's Hippocratic oath, right? What does that mean if you're engaged with a hospital that in fact does harm, right? What does it mean if you invite a doctor who in fact does harm, right? This is something that should be considered. And frankly, like, our professional bodies have a professional duty, as they judge themselves to be professionals, to uphold those standards and actually to punish their own members who violate those standards in the way that they engage with the PRC and the Communist Party.
There are also certain ethical
standards. Right? These are ethical and professional standards, right? And that is part of why we give lawyers and doctors the standing that we do in our societies, is because they do believe, and we do believe, that they have a professional sort of standard, and that they should be judged by their peers about their ethical practices, right? So that's another example of where civil society has a responsibility. And then as individuals, we have our own choices, right? We can make choices at the grocery store, when we're buying clothing, about what kind of products we buy. We can ask, before we purchase something out of a mail order catalog or company, like, we can email them to say, hey, where do you get your cotton? Where is this processing done? How does the cloth come together? These are all things that we can do, and they're small actions, but the fact is, companies respond to what consumers do. And we are not simply passive participants in our own government or in our own sort of political and commercial life. We get to make these choices. If we see something or if we have a problem, we can report it to our representatives. And it doesn't matter whether you're in Taiwan or whether you're in the United States, right? Our parliamentarians are there to represent us, and a large part of their work is oriented toward us as citizens, right? So they have an interest in hearing from us. They want to know what is going on, right? So not only do we have our own choices, but we have the ability to tell the people that represent us politically, this is what matters, this is what we're concerned about. And that makes an impact, it makes a difference, and it helps push people to think in different ways about what can we do, what would be new legislation, what would be new ideas. It leads to letters and questions of an administration or government to say, well, what are we doing about these problems? And that's the way that we as individuals can have a pretty remarkable impact.
Because they depend on our vote, and
right?
If we are mindful about human rights issues, if we're mindful about if the materials are legally sourced, if no people's lives were harmed, then if we have any concerns, of course we should reach out to our representatives and our congresspeople.
And the thing is, there are more and more resources that are available now, right? There have been a long-standing group of researchers that have been trying to expose some of the problems with supply chains coming out of China that have been implicated in forced labor. And, although you can't import it into the United States, it still is available to go into other countries, but that means people can make a choice. But those tools are now there. And I would actually thank Exeter for their presentation about launching a bigger tool to say here that
90,000 companies involved in Uyghur human rights violations and genocide.
I frankly would be surprised if it was that small.
Really?
I wouldn't be surprised if it goes bigger, because when you start counting all of the subsidiaries of like,
Yeah.
I think the Xinjiang Production and Construction Corps is, basically has a GDP within the state-owned enterprise that is like a small country.
Yeah.
Right? And it's equivalent to some large U.S. states in terms of its sort of gross domestic product as a company, right? And it's governing more than half of Xinjiang's economy, of the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region's economy, right? So how many subsidiaries, how many shell companies, how many things are tied into this in
They
some
also have
form or
their
another?
suppliers. They also have their
Yeah.
partners, their distributors. Yeah, if we just go down the line.
And so, in some sense, like those 90,000 companies are the ones where you've got observable, discrete links to very direct risk factors. But that's the concrete stuff. There's probably a whole level of sort of gray and cautionary things where we should really be wondering, right? I mean, for years, if you had a fingerprint scanner on the back of your phone, that was a little device that was made by a company that was using Uyghur forced labor.
Yeah.
Right? And that means that many of us probably had that. Didn't matter whether it was an iPhone or a
an
Google
Android,
Pixel,
yeah.
or right?
Yeah.
This was the company that made that part. It was involved in labor transfer programs of Uyghurs out of Xinjiang or East Turkestan to their factories. And for a long time, I had to look at that every day, realizing, this is something that I had that I didn't know, and that until I did.
Unfortunately, it's everywhere,
Where?
from our shoes to our phones to the cars we drive. There's a lot of smaller details, smaller spare parts. They come from China, and some of those parts are produced with the forced labor.
Right.
So
And
we
it's
really
one
have
of
to be mindful about it.
As I had the great honor of working for then Senator Rubio when we drafted this legislation, and we created the parts trying to get at forced labor outside of the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act.
Yeah.
But the unfortunate thing is, right, there are $4 billion worth of goods that have been prevented from entering the United States, but they still go out onto the world market. And no one else has really stepped up to say, no, we don't want to be complicit in this. I think that's actually the biggest point of all of these things that we should be thinking about, right? It's not that we have to be anti-CCP, or that we have to be saying that the PRC must fall, or wish some kind of political catastrophe on that, right? Because in one sense, a political crisis of that kind of magnitude means there's famine, there are dead. Like, it is a rupture that would be incredibly painful for the Chinese people. So, like, ideally there'd be some peaceful transition that allows them to have these pieces. But as citizens, as governments, as countries, the easiest thing is to decide we don't have to be complicit in this.
Yes.
Right? And that's actually ours.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, you and I don't get to say China should have this government or it should be this way, because we are not
But at
sort
least
of that.
we're not involved directly or indirectly in
Right.
these violations.
But we don't have to support the party. We don't have to support its abuses.
Yeah.
We don't have to support its efforts to interfere in our own system. Right? Those are choices that we have. And I think that's one of the great powers of democracy, is that we don't have to wait for our governments to pass the right policies for us to do the right thing.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter. Thank you so much. Great. It's a great interview. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks a lot. During the Ipac meeting, I met a lot of MPs, members of parliament from different countries. 日本から来たの国会議員もその Ipac 会議に参加しています。そして中山議員、僕は一つの質問があります。今の高市早苗さん、高市首相の下で日本の外交政策と対中政策はどのような方向に進むと思いますか？
まずね、私前議員です。
前議員
なんですが、私は安倍総理が総理の最後の時にですね、外務大臣政務官をしていました。で、中国も担当していました。で、高市総理、新総理の外交の方針の基盤にあるのは、安倍総理の外交のアップデートだと思っています。で、安倍総理は2020年まで総理を務めておられました。ですので、 その後ですね、まさに例えば台湾海峡危機、台湾有事に関しては、安倍総理が総理を退任された後にですね、まさに台湾有事は日本の有事、日本の有事は日米同盟の有事であるということは安倍総理が考えられました。でまさにその議員連盟をですね主催をさせていただいておりましたから、そういった観点で、この間ですね高市総理は、安倍総理がご勇退された後ですね、台湾に関わるさまざまなこれは懸念をですね実際に議論をしてきた責任者でもありますから、台湾海峡危機に関してはですね一段その安倍総理とは違うまたアップデートされた中での政策を展開すると考えています。
ありがとうございます。そして僕は一つの希望があります。台湾無事と日本無事の希望。はい、はい、ありがとうございます。
ありがとうございます。
はい、
大丈夫です。大丈夫。はい、ありがとうございます。
はい、こちらは岩谷議員、日本の岩谷議員、ありがとうございます。このインタビューをするとありがとうございます。今、高市首相の下で日本の外交政策と対中政策とかどのような向こうに進むと思いますか。
はい、私は日本の維新の会という政党のメンバーなんですけども、今回初めて高市政権、自民党と連立を組んで与党に入りました。
一緒に働いています。
その合意の中にですね、例えば日本版の CIA を作ることも合意しました。あるいは反スパイ法、こういったものを作っていこうということも合意をしてますので、今までなかったこと自体が非常に驚きなんですが、ようやく我々の連立政権の下でそっちを踏み出していくということになりますので、これで相当そのインテリジェンスの分野においても日本が世界に貢献できる部分が出てくるだろう、民主主義社会に貢献できる部分が出てくるだろうと思いますね。ですから対中政策で言いますと、いわゆる戦略的互恵関係ということで、いわば大人の付き合いをしましょうというのが基本方針ではありますが、しかしそれとは別の形でですね、こういったインテリジェンスの強化等を通して、ある意味で中国に対してもですね、正面から向き合っていくと、自立した国家として向き合っていくという方向になっていくかなと思います。
今そのインテリジェンスの問題、このスパイの問題は大きいですか。
そうですね、日本にはスパイ防止法もなければ、いわゆる CIA のような情報機関もちゃんとしたものがこれまでないんですよね。ですからこれでやっと普通の国家らしくなっていくということになります。はい、
でも大切です。
だから日本はですねスパイ天国と言われてますからね、もう非常に規制が緩いので、もう各国のスパイが活動し放題って今でも言われてきてますし、今も現状そうなんですね。やっとこれを改善していこうということになりました。
はい、ありがとうございます。
ありがとうございます。
So I have Marius Balo from Romania here who got detained in China for a very long time. And could you share your story with the viewers and tell why is it so important to pay closer attention to human rights issues in China?
Absolutely. There are very few voices that have emerged from China's forced prison labor gulag that are willing to share the story of what had happened there. I'm here today alongside British journalist and fraud investigator Peter Humphrey, who was also imprisoned in China for 2 years. We actually served that terrible time in the same prison. I just arrived there a year later after he was released. I ended up spending a total of 8 years there, accused of a bogus fraud charge. The first 2 years I was kept in solitary confinement. I was not able to talk to anyone. I was not able to leave a 12 square meter room.
For the whole year?
For the whole 2 years, until I was finally taken to a judge, and based on a couple of statements given by people that I have not seen there, they were not present, and I was not able to cross-question them. I was sentenced to 8 years. They declared that I was aware of that fraud I was accused of. And in China, if two people declare one thing, then that thing is considered to be valid. So after the 2 years, during this time, I was not able to make a phone call. I was not able to contact anyone. My family did not know what had happened to me. I never saw the light of the sun for 2 years. I was transferred over to the prison and enrolled in this forced labor scheme that's happening in every single prison in China. I ended up manufacturing products for many of our European and American multinationals. Prisons there are a corporation. People don't understand the scale, the magnitude of this. And I'm here today to share the story. And I'm here today to advocate for another Romanian female that is in prison there, has been in prison there for 8 years. Imagine a 28-year-old named Alina, that's her name. Imagine a 28-year-old that has no teeth left in her mouth because of the conditions that she's forced to live and work in. I think it's important to give heed to these stories as well, so that we are able to understand the reality in China better. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Marius. Most of my viewers are Taiwanese, and as you know, there are many Taiwanese people traveling to China, doing business, participating in scholarly exchanges. What would your message to them be? Should they be careful while traveling to such a country that sometimes shows direct hostility towards Taiwan?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think China is a minefield, and you never know when you step on one of these mines. I was lucky. I consider myself lucky, though I ended up serving 8 years in those terrible, harrowing conditions. But I consider myself lucky because I could have been sentenced to a life sentence. I could have been sentenced to death. In China, you can get sentenced to death having been accused of a financial crime. You don't have to kill anyone. You don't have to hurt anyone else to get a death sentence. I met people there that had been sentenced to death, and once you get sentenced to death for a financial crime, I'm talking about a financial case, this person was then obligated to wait for an entire year until that death sentence was confirmed by the Supreme Court so that they could kill him. And during this year, they tied him up to 2 other prisoners, hand and foot binded, so that he could not move, he could not feed himself, he could not do anything except follow the instructions of these two other prisoners that were tied to him. So they fed him. They took him to the hole where he defecated. For an entire year, this terrible torture was imposed on this poor man before they ended up killing him. So this is the reality of those prisons. We don't want to think about this because it hurts. But my point is, if it hurts, it means we can feel their pain, and once we do, we're gonna act. Thank
It's
you.
very important to spread the word. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
那么各位关于今天的 Ipac 的会议有什么样的想法，请在留言处这边留言。非常感谢各位的观看。如果喜欢这种内容的影片，就要按赞、订阅跟留言。想赞助的话，在这里跟影片下面会备存跟应援科技这2个网站的链接。我是斯坦，我们下次见，拜拜。